Hey everyone, welcome back to AI.Divine Insights. Today, we're going deep, like really deep. All right, let's jump into another deep dive. We're going way back this time to Exodus chapter 13, and we've got some excerpts from the New King James Version I'm really excited about. It's all about uncovering the origins of two big Jewish traditions, consecrating the firstborn sons and celebrating Passover.
Yeah, Exodus 13, it really does connect these two things together. It's kind of wild how the personal and communal experiences they had really shaped religious identity.
It does. I've got to say, though, the whole firstborn consecration thing has always puzzled me a bit. God tells Moses that every firstborn male, humans and animals too, belong to him, like they're, I don't know, set apart or something. What's the big deal with that, especially back then?
Well, you got to think about how ancient societies worked. The firstborn son, huge deal. They were the heir,
Hmm.
responsible for the family name, even taking on leadership roles. So it makes sense that this idea would get woven into the Israelites' beliefs.
Okay, that makes sense. But then there's this whole buying back thing, right? Redeeming the firstborn sons from serving God by offering a lamb instead. It's almost like some kind of symbolic swap.
Exactly. It's redemption. And it's super interesting. Practically speaking, it let families keep things running smoothly while still recognizing God's claim. But symbolically, whoa, you're getting into some deep theological stuff there about sacrifice and substitution. That kind of echoes through a bunch of different religions, don't you think?
Totally. Makes you think about how these ancient practices maybe connect to beliefs that develop later. Okay, there's another thing that always kind of jumps out at me. The part about donkeys. They had to be redeemed with a lamb or you had to break their necks. Donkeys. Why donkeys specifically?
Ah, good question. Donkeys were different back in ancient Israel. They were work animals, like super tied to everyday life, used for transportation, all that. Maybe they were just too ordinary to be consecrated directly. So either you redeemed them or you destroyed them. It shows how serious they were about following these rituals.
It's like they had these rules, right? About what's sacred and what's not. Hey, speaking of ritual, let's get to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or as most people know it, Passover. Moses tells the Israelites to remember their escape from Egypt with this feast. But why unleavened bread? Couldn't they have picked something, I don't know, more delicious to celebrate their freedom?
Put yourself in their shoes for a sec. The Israelites had to book it out of Egypt. No time to wait for bread to rise. It's like a really immediate reminder of their sudden freedom. Get it?
Oh, yeah. It's not about the food itself. It's about what it stands for.
Hmm.
Getting out of Dodge ASAP, the rush to be free.
Exactly. And Exodus 13 keeps going. It gets specific about the month, Abib, also called Nisan, and the whole 7-day celebration. What do you think about that?
I'm guessing those details weren't just pulled out of a hat. They had to mean something to the Israelites.
You got it. Abib, or Nisan, was the start of the barley harvest, so the celebration lined up with renewal and the land giving back to them. And 7 days, that was a typical festival length in the ancient Near East. It shows how important it was to spend real time remembering and being religious.
Like taking time to connect with your history and what you believe in.
Hmm.
It says parents had to explain the meaning of Passover to their kids. I always found that super interesting. Why is passing down the story so important?
It's not just telling a story, though, is it? It's about shaping who you are. Rituals and stories, they aren't just about what happened way back when. They affect us now, and they guide what we do later. By retelling the Exodus story, each generation of Israelites was basically saying, this is who we are. This is our relationship with God.
Makes you think about how we pass down stories and traditions in our own families. It's more than just remembering the old days. It's about being part of something bigger than ourselves. So it wasn't just packing up and heading to the promised land, was it? What about the trip itself?
You're right. That's a really important point. Exodus 13 shows that God was actively guiding the Israelites. They had directions, like a divine roadmap.
And not even the shortest route. They went the long way around through the wilderness to avoid those Philistines. How
Yeah.
do you think that was? Seems like taking the shortcut would have made more sense.
Well, Exodus 13 says God knew there'd be trouble with the Philistines, and he knew that fighting could make the Israelites lose hope and want to go back to Egypt. It's pretty wild when you think about it. God knew what was up. Divine foresight. Maybe taking the long way was like a training exercise to make their faith stronger and get them ready for the journey ahead.
Like God knew they needed time to grow and figure out who they were as a people before they got to their destination. And then there's the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night. Wow, what a sight that must have been.
Can you imagine? You're in the middle of nowhere, no clue what's next, and boom, These, like, physical signs of God right there with them. Talk about guidance and protection. It's like God saying, I got you.
It's a powerful image, right? Like
Ugh.
a reminder that you're not in this alone.
Hmm.
There's one other little thing that's always stuck with me. Moses taking Joseph's bones with them. Why was that so important?
Well, Joseph made his family promise to bury him in the Promised Land, a place he never got to see. And even after all that time, they kept that promise. It shows you how dedicated they were to their heritage. Honoring their ancestors and burial rituals were a big deal to them.
Like carrying a piece of their past with them through the wilderness,
Mm.
a connection to their ancestors, a reminder of where they were going. It's amazing how much this one chapter packs in.
It really is, and there's so much more to unpack here. What about you listening in? Anything in Exodus 13 jumping out at you? Anything really getting you thinking?
We'll be back in a bit to keep digging into all this. Stick around. We're back and still going strong with Exodus chapter 13. We were talking about the Israelites and their journey through the wilderness, led by God, with that pillar of cloud and fire.
Oh, yeah, a powerful image for sure. But think about it, this generation, they spent their whole lives as slaves. They were used to someone else calling the shots, and then suddenly, bam, they're in charge of their own path with all the uncertainty that comes with it.
I can only imagine the fear they must felt going into the unknown. Like they were leaving everything they knew behind, even if it was bad, and then stepping out into this massive wilderness.
It's huge.
Right.
Right, and that's why God being there all the time is so important. The pillar of cloud and fire, it wasn't just a GPS, it was like a giant billboard saying, hey, I'm with you. It
Yeah.
shows how strong their connection was with God.
I get that. Even today, when I'm dealing with big changes or things feel uncertain, that feeling of wanting some guidance or support, it's definitely real. It's comforting to know you're not the only one going through it.
We all need that, don't we? That feeling of connection. And Exodus 13 shows us that it can happen even when things are super crazy. So we've talked about the firstborn thing, the Passover symbolism, the Israelites' journey. What do you think the big takeaway is here? What's the message that still matters after all these years?
It feels like a story about how we figure out who we are. Like it's not just rules or old events. It's how personal and communal experiences work together with God's guidance to shape a people's sense of self.
You nailed it. Those practices and rituals, they weren't just things you had to do. They showed a shared history, a collective memory, a special relationship with God. It's not just about what they did, it's about who they were becoming.
And it's still going on, isn't it?
Yeah.
Every time someone celebrates Passover, it's not just remembering something that happened. It's taking part in that story, connecting to a tradition that's been going for ages.
Totally. Each generation adds its own spin on things. That's why these stories are so powerful and stick around. They talk about the stuff we all need, that feeling of belonging, remembering, and having those shared rituals. They shape how we see the world and our place in it. What about you? Anything in your life that connects you to a community or your heritage?
I was thinking about something we mentioned earlier, Moses taking Joseph's bones with him. It seemed like a small thing, but it really shows how much they respected their ancestors.
Yeah, Joseph made his family promise to bury him in the Promised Land, a place he never even got to see. And generations later, they kept their word. It's a testament to how loyal they were. That continuity in the midst of so much change and upheaval.
It's such a strong image. Carrying those bones to the wilderness, it shows how committed they were. And it also emphasizes how important burial rituals were. It wasn't just practical. It was a way to stay connected to their past, their land, their God.
And that connection is what kept them going through all that wilderness wandering. But it wasn't a walk in the park, right? Imagine those Israelites fresh out of slavery, facing the harsh realities of the desert. It was a test for sure. It forced them to face their doubts and fears head on.
The wilderness as a testing ground. That's a common idea in a lot of spiritual traditions, isn't it? It's like a place where you're stripped down, bare forced to confront your weaknesses, and maybe even come face to face with something bigger than yourself.
It's a place of hardship, but also transformation. It peeled away their old ways and made them rely on God for everything. Do you see how that idea of the wilderness being a test still resonates with us today?
Totally. Think about times in our own lives when we've been through the ringer. Losing a job, the death of someone you love, those moments that really shake you up, don't they often make us rethink our priorities, our beliefs, even who we are at our core?
That's it, exactly. It's when we're vulnerable and uncertain that we often find our true strength, our resilience. And just like the Israelites, we might find ourselves leaning on something beyond ourselves, something that gives us hope and helps us through the darkness. What about you? Ever had a wilderness moment in your life? How did it change your perspective?
We'll be right back to keep exploring the lessons we can learn from the Israelites' journey. Don't go anywhere.
And we're back. Finishing up our deep dive into Exodus 13, we've been looking at how this chapter gets the Israelites going, both on the ground, actually traveling, and also like their identity, how it was changing. Right. We saw how God took them through the wilderness on purpose, almost like using that time to mold them, get them ready for what's coming. It was a real trial by fire out there.
It's interesting, isn't it? How the wilderness always seems to be this place where people go to be alone and grow spiritually. Like it's where you face your limits and what you're scared of, and maybe even have this huge encounter with the divine.
You got it. And for the Israelites, that wilderness took away their old ways, made them rely on God for everything. Food, directions, safety, the whole 9 yards.
You know what gets me? How the Israelites kept complaining and whining through the whole trip. It's like being in the wilderness made their human flaws even worse.
That's sharp. Even though God was right there with them, they still had doubts, got scared, missed how things were back in Egypt. But through it all, God stuck with them, provided for them, kept leading them towards their destiny.
There's a big lesson in that, don't you think? Even when we're going through rough patches, even when we have our doubts, we're not alone. And we can come out of those experiences even stronger.
Totally. It makes me think those tough times, those wilderness moments, they're not there to break us. They're there to make us better. Exodus 13 shows us that even in those dark times, we can dig deep and find a strength we never knew we had. How about you listening? Ever been through your own wilderness? How'd it change you?
It's amazing how those times when we're vulnerable can change us for the better, right?
Yeah.
And just like the Israelites had that pillar of cloud and fire to remind them that God was there, we often find our own strength and things to guide us when we need them most.
So true. And we got to remember the Israelite story didn't end in the wilderness. They made it to the promised land, a place full of good things where their dreams could come true. Their journey wasn't just about wandering around, it was about reaching a goal, a place where they could finally thrive.
It's like a perfect picture of our own journeys with faith, don't you think? We're going to have those wilderness times, those times when we're tested and we doubt. But in the end, they can help us understand ourselves better, what we're here for, and our connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And maybe, just maybe, those hard times are what get us ready for the good stuff that's waiting for us, like how the wilderness prepared the Israelites for the promised land. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Exodus 13, what's sticking with you? What are you taking away from exploring these ancient practices, stories, and lessons that still mean something today?
We hope this deep dive gave you some fresh perspectives on Exodus 13, and maybe it even got you thinking about your own journey with faith.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep looking for the wisdom hidden in these ancient texts. Also, please like and subscribe to AI.DivineInsights for daily podcast episodes.
See you next time.